Okay, fantastic. Welcome everyone. Thank you. We are closing in on 200 plus folks joining us. Thank you all for taking time on a Friday afternoon to join us for a very important seminar. We hope you also invited family and friends and folks outside of science, and just really am encouraging everyone to ask questions that they have regarding all aspects of the pandemic and COVID-19 vaccines. All right, so it looks like we have over 100 people answering that survey, so please keep doing that if you just joined us. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Erica Sanchez, and I'm an assistant professor at SF State in the biology department, and I will be one of your co-facilitators today. I'll be joining Gabriela Alvarez Azevedo, who is a master's student in our biology department, and it's my honor to join her as we facilitate all of our speakers today and your question and answer periods. So I'd like to make sure that we acknowledge that this was not done by one or even a few people. This is a huge effort between both San Francisco State as well as UCSF. We even have a speaker from the University of New Mexico. And so this is a great effort. SF Build has been an extremely important component, and the efforts of their program has been incredible. We are so lucky to be joined by them. And what I also like to acknowledge is that we brought this together because students were asking for this type of program. And so Gabriela reached out to several of us and explained that her family members are asking about what is going on. What should we know? What should we think? What are we asking? What's real about COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines? And so we're hoping to start those conversations and open up a space where we can get those answers today. And so we know you have a lot of questions. We have some resources for you to input your questions, and we're hoping to facilitate those in 2 different answer periods today. Ella, please introduce yourself to the group.
Sorry, my voice is cracking. I'm Gabriela Alvarez Azevedo, and as Dr. Erica Sanchez, thank you so much for the introduction, mentioned, I'm a master's student in the biology department here at San Francisco State University. Yes, as she was mentioned, just to give a little of background, yeah, this webinar was designed, really inspired by the concerns and fears my family had and expressed with me, and I'm pretty sure we all share this type of experience, and we are really thankful to the panelists who are dedicating their time to explain to us and walk us through the accurate information out there. And because we hear from everywhere different types of information, and sometimes we don't know what to believe and what not to believe. So definitely I want to thank Dr. Sanchez, Dr. Marcus Magaña, Dr. Laura Burris, SF Build program, Maggie, Janet, Brenda, specifically, like this has been a group effort. It would have not been done by myself at all. So thank you so much, everyone, for your support. And just want to acknowledge that this is we are all in this together. The pandemic, we will get through it together, and don't feel isolated. We are all here for you, and yeah, I hope this benefits people, and we all get more information that will benefit, and we can also share with others. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabriela. Next, we wanted to quickly acknowledge, what brought you here today. We asked you a few short questions, and so I'm just going to take a glimpse at the responses. It looks like over 60% of folks joining us today are curious about the COVID-19 vaccine and have questions regarding that. You're in the perfect place. And then we have a variety of folks joining us, students who were interested in attending so they can learn more and talk about this in the classroom, which is great. And some questions about access, which is something we'd like to talk about. Obviously, that's been a big question in different communities, how to access, who can access, et cetera. So we're hoping we can cover that. And we have prepared some questions that we asked our panelists to review, but we know you'll have tons of questions. And so we have access for you to input those throughout the program today. So it sounds like you heard about this through social media, which is great. Again, thank you, SF Build. You also heard about this through email. So again, we were trying to get this out there and share it with lots of people. We have over 200 of you today. Thank you. And then it looks like if you were offered the vaccine today, that we have over half of the attendees said yes. So that's very interesting. We were just curious to see. But you know what? Importantly, we have a variety of answers between agree and even disagree. And so we're hoping to provide you with information to continue to make that decision for yourself. All right, I saw a hand up. Am I seeing a hand up? Maybe my technology team can help me with that. I have a hand up from Linda Driscoll. I will let you speak, Linda. Everything okay, Linda? Maybe that was an accident. We'll move on. Please go ahead and ask your question. No worries. Please go ahead and ask your questions in the chat box, and then we'll also give you a link to another resource. Okay, so we mentioned that we invited a wonderful group of panelists, and we'll have each of them speak. First off, we are going to hear from Dr. Edgar Pierluissi, who will give us an introduction to the vaccines themselves. We'll then hear from Dr. Stacy Torres, Dr. Melanie Moses, and finish with hearing about the COVID variants that have been in the news and you might have heard of with Dr. Pleuni Pennings. So we'll actually have a question and answer session after Dr. Pierluissi speaks, where you can ask specifically about the vaccines, and then we'll have our 3 talks and have another longer Q&A session at the end. And so this is so that everyone can make sure that they get their questions answered, and we can also review your questions and try to compile some of those for our time. So you might be saying, where can I put my questions? We have the ability for you to do that in the Q&A through the Zoom, but I'm going to ask Gabriella to explain another resource that we had so that we can compile and also archive the questions for further resource sharing in the future. Gabriella?
Thank you. So yes, we have compiled a couple of resources for everyone. So the first one that you see here for the resource list is a list of many links that we found that provide a lot of information about vaccines and COVID in general. And you can feel free to open the document and open the links if you want. And at the bottom of this list, there will be a link where it will direct you to another document where you can actually add the links that you would like to provide us. So and later we can add it to this main list and we can all share our resources. As I said before, we are all in this together. And the second QR code there and the second link that you see there is some infographics that SFSU students have done in different languages where they talk about, with some infographics we have right now are talking about the contents of the Pfizer vaccine or what kind of tests are out there to be tested for COVID-19 and other type of facts and misconceptions. So this will be a continuous project. So whenever you can, go back to that link. Feel free to share all these infographics in your social media with all your relatives or friends that you think will benefit. And lastly, the next resource, please. Erica, can we go to the
Yes.
next slide, please? Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Um, so this is another resource that I wanted to provide to everyone. And I want to acknowledge that actually Dr. Edgar Pierluissi is part of this speakers bureau that was developed at UCSF. And these are professors and scientists who would like to reach out to that community. And if you want to organize another webinar similarly than this, you can actually participate and you can email the Dr. Alice Fishman, and you can request actually speakers that can go to your specific communities, and they have these presentations in different languages, available in different languages. So I would highly encourage you, if you really want to reach out to the communities that need support, to please participate. I also put these links in the research list so it's easier to find them. So I highly encourage it. I think we can move
Fantastic.
on.
Thank you, Gabriella. Also, I just wanted to mention there are quite a few links that we're providing, but this is a way of getting everything out there that we have prepared for you. So I did provide those 2 links that we mentioned. One for that resource list. I want to emphasize that this was, again, the request and the efforts were put in by the students to make these available in multiple languages, again, to make this accessible for more community members. So thank you to the students who took on that challenge, which was wonderful. And then also I promised you a link for questions, and so I added that in most recently. And so you can organize by speaker if you have a specific question, or you can ask a general question in that form. All right, next, Gabriella is going to lead us in a moment of silence.
Yes, before we start with the speakers, we would like we put this moment aside to acknowledge and to honor people who have passed sadly from this disease, and also all our heroes out there that help us fight in the front line. So we will take a 30-second moment of silence. If you can please join me, it will be greatly appreciated. And we will start now. Thank you so much for joining us and for that respect. And I just again, I just want to emphasize that like we are all in this together, and that as a community we will get through all of this, and hopefully we can spread the word to our different communities, and we can all get better information and in general get through this pandemic.
Thank you, Gabriella. It is an honor to join so many of you today to learn and also to come together to support each other. And so we really appreciate, again, you attending, and we hope to provide you information that you can share with others who couldn't attend today. But just to remember that it is being recorded, and so it can be reviewed after today as well. Okay, so our first speaker, we are so honored to have Dr. Edgar Pierluissi joining us from UCSF, where he works at the School of Medicine, and he will be discussing some specifics about the COVID-19 vaccines currently available, and then we will move on to a Q&A session with him afterwards. So Dr. Pierluissi, please go ahead and start up your slides.
Okay, hold on 1 second here. Let's do this one. Share, okay. Are you seeing my screen okay to say COVID-19 mRNA vaccines? How do they work? I'm seeing yeses and nos. Yes.
I think it's still loading a bit on some screens.
Oh, well, hold on. Let me just try something here. You got it all good? Okay, terrific. There. Well, Dr. Sanchez, Gabriela, Mariel, thank you so much for first hosting this. This is such a great idea and such a value for the community. So thank you for that. And then thank you for the invitation. I'm just really happy to speak here. I'm not an expert, like I'm not a virologist in this area. And so I'll defer to many of the other panelists, I think, in a number of domains. But I am here to talk about the mRNA vaccines and how they work. And we'll take questions and answer them as best we can. All right, so let's see. I wanted to start with the virus itself. So this is the enemy, this is the target, this is what we're trying to, the vaccines are all being raised against this thing. So what is this? This is the coronavirus that we're talking about. It's got this shell here you see around it, which is made up of some lipids and some proteins. And then it's got these spikes that you've probably heard about, the spike protein. These are these spikes that stick out all on the outside of the virus, and this gives it its name. When you look at it in 2 dimensions, it looks like a corona right around it. So that's why it's called the coronavirus. And this virus has a number of genes inside of it. They're not really genes, it's RNA. And this RNA codes for about 29 or 28 proteins, and one of which is the spike protein. And the way these viruses work is they kind of hijack your normal process of making proteins. So every day, 24/7, 7 days a week, all year round, your body is making proteins to replace the ones that they've already made that sort of get worn out and degraded. So you're always making new proteins. And the way you make those proteins is you have to first make what's called a messenger RNA. And so your body is constantly making messenger RNA, and your body's constantly turning that into proteins. So that's an ongoing thing. That's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps us healthy. And what this virus does is it takes its own message and it inserts it into the cell, and then hijacks your own body's way of making proteins so that you make virus proteins. And that's how it infects cells. Now, what the vaccine is doing is it's taking one of these proteins here, the spike protein gene, it's encoded in this messenger RNA, and it embeds it in a lipid, sort of a fatty little package, and that's what gets injected into the body. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But the only point I want to make here is that the virus itself has a number of genes, and the vaccine is only using one. So out of the gate, I will tell you that with this vaccine, it's impossible to get COVID from the vaccine because it's only using one of the genes. Okay, that's a really important point. So what's in the vaccines? Well, I'm just going to talk mostly about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. Both of them have the same spike mRNA. And then there's the rest of the stuff that's in there. Here it's lipids, potassium chloride, some potassium sodium phosphate salts, and sucrose. And then for the Moderna, it has other stabilizers, lipids, tromethamine hydrochloride, acetic acid, and sodium acetate. All these things do is to help stabilize the messenger RNA. And then the lipids form a kind of a shell around the messenger RNA, and that's what helps it get into your cells. So that's what's in the vaccines. And by the way, again, maybe to preempt a question about allergies, the only thing you really have to worry about about this vaccine is if you're allergic to any component in it. And it turns out that's extremely rare. So you might hear the word polyethylene glycol as one of these lipids here. If you're allergic to that, you probably shouldn't take the vaccine. Or if you're allergic to polysorbate, which isn't in the vaccine, but it's sometimes people react to the polyethylene glycol. But those are really the major component that you might be worried about for an allergy, and those are extremely rare. So how does it work? So we've already talked about this is the entire coronavirus. We're taking that one gene that's right there, the messenger RNA, and we're putting it mixed in with those lipids that I talked about, and it forms a kind of a shell around the messenger RNA, and then that gets injected into your body. And here it is. You see this vaccine coming in. It's fusing with the cell, and the messenger RNA, just that one message, no, not any other proteins from the virus, gets translated into one portion of the spike protein. The spike protein is made up of three of these things come together to form the actual spike that goes on the surface of the cell. And so now what happens is, now that you have this protein sticking out of your own muscle cell, your body can see it, and it sees it as foreign, and it raises an antibody response to it, as well as a cell-mediated response to it, and that's what protects you. So now your body sees this, it makes antibodies, so that if you get exposed to the virus out in the community somewhere after you've got your vaccination, it will take that virus, and hopefully it'll prevent it from getting into cells and causing an infection. And we know from the randomized controlled trials that in fact it does prevent severe infection, and we're going to go over that in just a second. Here's another picture of the same thing. It's a little bit more colorful, but again, here's our messenger RNA. It's in this lipid nanoparticle that gets injected into the cell. This message then gets turned into spike protein. The proteins then go to the surface of your cell, and then antibodies can be made to it. So here's what we know about the vaccines. 2 vaccines are approved so far. As I said, they're very similar to each other and made in mostly the same way. And they're both highly effective at preventing serious cases of COVID-19. And both of them require 2 shots. The Pfizer vaccine works in that you get your first shot, you have to wait 21 days, then you'll get your second shot. And it needs pretty deep cold storage. So this requires, this is probably not something you'll see in rural communities. This is mostly going to be, I think, in urban areas because this is kind of hard to get everywhere. And then the Moderna vaccine, you get your first shot, you wait 28 days, then you get your second shot. And this can require less intensive cold storage. So this might be more widely spread. I'm going to talk about the randomized controlled trial using the Pfizer vaccine, but the Moderna had very similar results. So what they did in this study is they took about 43,000 people and randomized them into 2 groups. One group got the vaccine and the other group just got a placebo. And it showed remarkable efficacy. So if you got the vaccine, there were only 8 cases of COVID infection in that case. If you got the placebo, there were 162 cases, which turns out to have an efficacy of about 95%, which was really outstanding. This puts you, it's way better than flu. As you know, the flu efficacy is somewhere anywhere from, I think last year was 45%. Generally, it's around 50 or 60%. This puts you way up into the measles category. This is pretty highly efficacious vaccine. There are some side effects. So in the short term, most people will have some arm soreness and redness at the injection site. Over half will have some fatigue and headache, and about 1 in 10 may have fever. It turns out these side effects are more prominent after the second shot compared to the first shot. There are rare cases of a treatable allergic reaction have been reported, and that's why when you get this, you have to wait about 15 minutes after you get the shot to make sure you're not having one of these allergic reactions. How common are these? So far in the earliest report, which was published in December, there were about 11 cases per million people who got the vaccine. So pretty rare. To give you some idea, for the flu vaccine, that's about 1 allergic reaction, severe allergic reaction for a million vaccines. So it's more allergic, say, than the flu shot, but it's still extremely rare, and nobody has died as a result of this. And then with regards to the other symptoms, they mostly don't last very long. In general, they're done within 1 or 2 days. Some people have reported symptoms as long as up to 3 to 5 days afterwards, but most it goes away within 1 or 2 days. So we know because these studies were so large, we can look at subgroups to ask the question, are they effective amongst subgroups as well? And they are effective in older adults, the same in men versus women, and in all the age groups tested. In the trials, they only started at age 16 and up, across all races and ethnicities, and among patients with obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, and HIV. We already mentioned that the fever headache may occur, especially with the second shot, and how rare the allergic reactions are. What we don't know yet is we know that the vaccines prevent cases of COVID and they prevent severe cases of COVID. So we know that. We don't know if it can reduce infection that doesn't have symptoms. That's still being studied. So we should know more about that in the next few months. We don't know that it can prevent transmission among people without symptoms. We also don't know are there additional rare immediate side effects. I think we have given the number of people that have been vaccinated, it's highly unlikely we'll find some new ones, but that's always possible. We don't know anything about long-term side effects because the vaccines are so new. We also, there's no reason to think these might cause a problem with pregnancy, but at the moment, these are not, the recommendations from the CDC and the World Health Organization are that women who are pregnant should discuss this with their primary care provider, and they should make their own decisions based on their own risk assessments. We don't know about kids because they weren't included in the studies. I mentioned about long-term side effects. We also don't know how long the protection will last. So that's going to be a concern. It may be that we'll need boosters down the road. And that's what it says, we might need some booster shots. And again, we'll hear more about this later with the variants, but as the variants come up, we may need sort of a variant booster down the road as well. So to make a decision about the vaccine, whether it's right for you, the question really should be, how do you weigh the vaccine side effects with the risk of COVID-19 disease? I think that's the question people should be asking themselves. I think for most people, there is, as I said, there is no true contraindication except for the allergies that I mentioned, which are very, very rare. And in almost all settings, physicians are recommending this, even if in the setting of being immunocompromised and so on. So I think for most people, they'll come down on the side of them taking this because the side effects are quite rare. But if you're somebody who, for example, had a severe anaphylactic reaction already to a different vaccine or to some food allergy, physicians are still recommending that you take it, but you take it under controlled circumstances. But in that setting, somebody might decide not to take it, and that would be reasonable. What's not going to change, despite getting right now, I think we've had about 28 million people have received a shot in the United States, and maybe 7 or 8 million, I think, have had 2 doses. So we're not even at 10%. But we have to get up to very high numbers before any of this changes. So I would say for the next 6 months or so, this is not going to change. We've got to keep doing what we're doing and what we've done so successfully in San Francisco when we've put our mind to it to try to slow the infection. So you got to wear face masks, careful hand hygiene, make sure you maintain social distancing and avoiding crowds as much as possible. I don't think that's going to change, at least for the next 6 months or so. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there and happy to take questions.
So I guess let's start with one of them that says, do you believe that the Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is reliable, even though it's only one shot?
Yeah, the studies were really pretty clear. So this is, we are really fortunate that we have a number of other vaccines that are going to come online. I think Johnson & Johnson just submitted their emergency use authorization to the FDA like yesterday or today. And so we need more of these vaccines for sure. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine absolutely was effective. And there's a couple of things to note about that vaccine. So the headline number that you read in the press was about 70 or 80% efficacy, but the number for preventing severe infection was up to 85%. And that is that would be a goal. The goal here is if you have COVID, but you don't need to get hospitalized, that would be a victory. And it was 85% efficacious to prevent that outcome. So I would say yes. And then the other thing to note about Johnson & Johnson is that even though it wasn't as good against the original variant, it was tested in South Africa, and there it was still efficacious, less so in the order of 50 or 60%, but it was still efficacious against that variant. So I think that's going to be the case for many of these vaccines. Is there's some variants we'll have to worry about, some more than others, but the South African one is particularly worrisome, and there was efficacy against it. It didn't evade the vaccine, in other words. So there's hope that it will still provide some protection there.
Thank you. We also had a number of questions. You went over some of the side effects that are expected or normal, but can you speak a bit to some folks are hearing from people who've been vaccinated that second shot will elicit more of a response, and people seem to have more side effects. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, the studies show that. Yeah, the second shot, you get there's more symptoms, and in some respects, the way experts talk about this is that it is a sign that your body is doing what it's supposed to, it is mounting an immune response to the vaccine. It is developing a cell-mediated immunity, which is really important for long-term protection. And so all those things are the symptoms that we're feeling are the signs of your body doing what it's supposed to do to raise an immune response. And yeah, there's more of it. So there's more fatigue, there's more headache, there's more chills, and it's just much more common with the second shot than the first. The recommendations are, and there's not great science behind this, but the recommendations are to not take an anti-inflammatory before you get the vaccine, but it's fine to take an anti-inflammatory afterwards if the symptoms are really worrisome, or you feel like it's getting in the way of going to work or something, you can take Motrin or Tylenol, and it'll generally relieve most of the symptoms.
Wonderful, thank you. We also have a few questions about whether or not we'll be needing to take a COVID-19 like vaccine or a coronavirus vaccine, if you will, annually, or what should we expect? Do you have any insight into that?
No, the New York Times has written about that. That maybe this will turn into kind of like a flu shot. Every year we'll have to, figure out which variants are circulating in the world, raise a vaccine to that, and then give that vaccine annually, just like we do for the flu. I honestly, I don't know what's going to happen with that. The problem with the variants is real. They're gonna, and we know of some right now, but there's probably some out there at this minute that we don't know about because they haven't been sequenced. And at the moment, like I said, the vaccine seems to have some activity against all, but it's possible that we'll lose efficacy against some new variant that's out there, in which case, yeah, we'd have to raise up more vaccine, and we may be in this state of constant, I mean, that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm also seeing questions about what is the importance of waiting the 21 days in between doses, and can you get the second dose sooner?
Right. Well, I don't know the science why it is that the one is 2 weeks and one is 3 weeks. Nobody's really recommending it getting any sooner. The good news is that it looks like people have pushed out the recommendations for how long you might wait to get the second shot. So in fact, if you get your first shot and have trouble getting your second shot, it's okay to wait, even longer, 6 or 8 weeks to get your second shot. Ideally, you would get it within the time that's recommended, but more and more, it's looking like you can go a little bit later and still get your second shot and be okay. I don't know what the risks are or benefits of getting the shot early are. Maybe some of the scientists on the panel know why you wait 3 weeks for one and 2 weeks for another. I don't know that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
We also have a few. Sorry, go ahead, Gabby.
No, go. I just wanted to ask a really important question because I as well that it's about people who have immune-related diseases. They are very concerned, and how will immune suppressant medication affect the usefulness of the vaccine?
Right. So that's it. We just had this discussion just yesterday because we're starting to do vaccinations in the hospital, and many of the patients here are on immunosuppressive medications. And our feeling is that probably the benefit of getting the vaccine outweighs any potential risk. And again, these are not what we're injecting into people, some inactivated virus or anything like that. It's just the mRNA. And to step back a little bit, speaking about the mRNAs, when we make mRNAs in our bodies, they generally last, less than 72 hours. And that's how long the mRNA from this vaccine lasts as well. So our thinking is that probably it's going to be safe to give it to people who are immunocompromised. And that is not a contraindication to getting the vaccine. So the CDC and the World Health Organization have not included those clinical conditions as reasons to not get the vaccine.
Thank you. Dr. Pierluissi, this might be a little bit of a different type of question, but with your position as a medical physician, do you have any insight into the rollout in our community of the vaccine as far as access? Like, we'd love to get your perspective, if you don't mind, as a physician, as to what you might be seeing and what people maybe can expect, if you can speak to that at all.
I'm not in that position to know about the rollout of the distribution. I have to say, I read the same things you do about some of the access has been very, very uneven, and I'm hearing wildly different things. Like, we're supposed to have opened up a center at Moscone South that's supposed to be able to give 7,000 shots a day. At the same time, we hear that Kaiser canceled 5,000 appointments because they did not have vaccine. And so I'm not so the answer is I'm not the person to answer that question about the distribution and the and access at this point. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate your answer, because I think a lot of us are sitting with, every day we're kind of hearing something new, or something might be opening, or it might be pushed back. And so maybe what we need to think of as a community is that this is an ever evolving situation. Would you agree with that? And we just need to do our best to, if something is available, to look into that in our closer community.
Yeah, and by evolving, that is so right. I mean, it's literally evolving every day, and it's evolving every day right here in this, where I work as well. So there are days where we have access to vaccine to give, and some days where we just haven't. And so it's, yeah, it is evolving for sure.
Right. I mean, I know personally, living in San Francisco County, having parents who live south in a different county, a grandmother who lives in a different county. We're all Californians, but we have all very different information from our local area. So unfortunately, it looks like that might be a little bit frustrating sometimes for a while. So maybe just acknowledging that that's something that hasn't been fully figured out, but that maybe we can help each other with that information moving forward when we get it.
Yeah, and what we hear again is that as these supply chains become a little bit more consistent, we can build out programs where people can reliably go to get shots. And the expectation is that really shouldn't take that much longer. It really should be in the next couple of weeks. We should have some steady supply.
Great. Gabriella, maybe you can give the next question. We have about 5 more minutes with Dr. Pierluissi.
Yes, so it's I'm trying to combine multiple questions. So one question says, as a doctor or physician, will you recommend getting the vaccine? How long the immunization will last? And that kind of leads to the next question, that if we are getting antibodies against the virus, and we will get immune response, why are we, it's only lasting a year, shouldn't it last longer?
So about the recommending for the vaccine, yes, I would recommend it for anybody who can get it. And I know there's going to be a staged rollout, people over 65, healthcare workers, and so on. Because I work in the hospital and I'm exposed to people with COVID-19, I was offered the vaccine in December and absolutely took it the first day I could. And I've had my second shot in January. And so, yes, I think as soon as you can get it, as soon as you're eligible for it, you should get it. And I just want to say something about why this is important for a public health reason. It's important for you so that you don't get sick. And it's also important so that you don't get others sick, your family, in my case, my family, but patients as well. But these variants, the less time the virus can spend in your body having an opportunity to mutate and cause a variant, the less variants there will be. So I can't think of a more important reason to get people vaccinated as soon as possible, because it will just reduce the chance that variants will develop in that population. And so that to me is a really important reason to make sure that everybody gets vaccinated as soon as possible, so that we don't generate more of these mutants. So for all those reasons, I would strongly recommend that everybody get a vaccine when they can. Gabriella, there was another part to your question. I forgot what it was.
Yes, it is that if the vaccine will help us create antibodies against the virus, why does it say that it will last like a year? The immune response will last a year and not longer?
Yeah, so that's exactly what, as I said, the messenger RNA that's in the vaccine only lasts a few days in your body, and that's enough to make the protein, and you raise your immune response to that. Then you get your booster shot, and then you have some cell-mediated immunity. And why those it turns out for some vaccines, you need to get a booster shot, and because your immunity seems to wane. Why that is, I don't know why that varies from one vaccine to the next. You could take one vaccine and you'll be immune for the rest of your life. And some you need to get re-upped, like, tetanus shot, for example, you need to get re-upped on that. And the flu shot, obviously the vaccine changes. So that's why you need to get a new flu shot every year. In this case, we don't really know how long the immunity is going to last. So it may last, a year, it may last much longer. We just don't know because it's just too new, and we haven't really had the experience to know. So this one might be one that lasts long, or it might be one where you'll need boosters. I think what's happening though is the question's going to be moot a little bit because of these variants, where we're going to probably need additional vaccines that are now directed against different types of variants.
Thank you so much. Our next questions are about allergies. Is it true that having food allergies will have if you have food allergies, you will also have an allergic reaction to the vaccine?
Well, that statement is not true. So it isn't the case that if you have a food allergy, you will have an allergic reaction to the vaccine. So most people with food allergies are going to do great. It turns out, of the people who had severe anaphylactic reactions, many of them, but not all, many of them had anaphylactic reactions to other things in their lives. In some cases, it could be food. So the flip side to that, so most people with food allergies will take the vaccine, they'll be fine. Of the people who had severe allergic reactions, some of them had severe food allergies as well. So for those people, what I would say, and most physicians are recommending, to go ahead and get the vaccine, get it in a setting where you're monitored, make sure you don't have the reaction. If you have the reaction, you could be treated. And then that person, you would probably not give them the second dose. But as I said, most people with allergies are going to do fine with the vaccine. Almost all.
Thank you so much. And the next question is about, like most of us probably heard this, but have this concern. Should we be concerned that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines haven't been tested for nearly as long in terms of years as other vaccines in the United States? And if you could please share some information about the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Okay, so on the Pfizer Moderna, yeah, this is the first time we're using this technology. Now, the technology has been researched and studied, for the last probably over 10 years in animal models and in human cell lines to generate the evidence that this is something that would be safe in humans. And then the studies that were done, these are really large studies that would have been done in any case. So that is, if you look at the vaccine approval process, you would need a study like the one that we had that were done in Pfizer and Moderna. They wouldn't have been any different, probably. They were large, well-done studies. What was speeded up is the FDA approval. That was shrunk into a matter of weeks instead of what usually takes months or sometimes years. So that's the part that was sped up. And then am I concerned about the long term? Knowing what we know about the science, I think it's people have to be studied. We have to see if there's any long term effects from these vaccines. But these appear to be, at least theoretically, these are fairly safe. Like I said, the messenger RNA only lasts for about 3 days in your body, then gets degraded and goes away entirely. There's no other components of the virus in the vaccine. So these should be safe, but we have to do long-term studies to make sure. And then you asked a question about the AstraZeneca. What was the question there? I'm sorry.
If you could share more information about it.
Yeah, so that's a whole different methodology. It's actually a methodology that we have more experience with. It was used for the MERS, and I believe Ebola vaccine uses this adenovirus. It's an adenovirus in which that's modified, in which the spike protein is put into that. And again, it's close to what happens with the Moderna ones, in that in the AstraZeneca, it's a DNA virus, so the DNA gets put into your cell, it gets taken up into the nucleus, and then there the message is made for the spike protein that gets sent out to the cytoplasm, and then there you make your spike protein. So everything ends up with messenger RNA being made into spike proteins. This one just starts a little bit earlier in the process. And it works. I mean, all these things that raise antibodies against the spike protein seem to be quite effective. And the AstraZeneca also works. And so if it was available, if it was the one that was available, I would take it. I would take any vaccine at this point that was offered to me. The safety profile seems pretty good. And again, that one, we have more experience in human beings, and it seems to be a fairly safe vaccine. Maybe a little less effective than some of the other ones. But keep in mind, the coronavirus pandemic that we're treating right now is different than the coronavirus pandemic that we were treating during the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, because that was mostly the original coronavirus, and now there's a number of mutants all around. So, but in any event, the AstraZeneca seem to be pretty effective.
Thank you. I think our last question, if you have time for one final question, is we have a few folks, I think several folks probably in the audience have the same question about if you have had coronavirus, if you've tested positive, what is your advice for those folks on whether to get vaccinated or not?
Yeah, the recommendations are that you should go ahead and get vaccinated. Just recently, Dr. Fauci came out and said it may be that people who've already had coronavirus might do well with just one shot instead of two. It's as if the coronavirus infection itself was the first shot, and then you get the booster with the second shot, and then you're done. The thing about natural immunity is that you're going to have antibodies against all manner of different portions of the coronavirus. And what you're going to do with the booster is try to emphasize those that are against the spike protein. So the recommendation is that you shouldn't get it within, I think the recommendation is within the first 90 days after you had your coronavirus. So leave it alone for 90 days and then come back for a single booster.
Thank you. We really appreciate the time that you've spent with us. We believe that Dr. Pierluissi has to attend a previously scheduled engagement that starts soon. So we appreciate the time that he's taken to be with us today. But we'd like to say thank you, and we appreciate all of your insight and information.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, I'll stay on till 3 and then I'll have to leave. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Thank you all for your questions. In full disclosure, there are so many questions that I have gotten kicked out of our webinar twice because my computer is trying to refresh all of your wonderful questions. We appreciate them. Gabriella and I are trying to do our best to survey the questions, find repeat questions that seem to be of large interest and get those out there. But again, we have those resources that we have made available and will continue to add to that we will give you the links for. Wonderful. So we're really excited. Our next speaker is Dr. Stacy Torres, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences, also at UCSF. And Dr. Torres will be giving our next short talk, and we welcome her. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank the organizers for putting together this fantastic panel. I'm learning in real time, and I really appreciate all the knowledge that's being shared, not only in the presentation, but also the fantastic information-rich links that were shared before. So I'm going to organize my remarks around 2 points, and it's a quick presentation, so there should be lots of room for Q&A. But the first is to acknowledge that there is some community fear, and I'll briefly talk about how science has hurt people in the past as a way of addressing why people do have this fear. The second point that I'm going to speak on is addressing building trust with the community and what scientists can do or are doing to gain this community trust, which is so crucial in order to reach the numbers, the large numbers of vaccinated Americans in order to end this pandemic. So on the first point, the mistrust about the vaccine reflects historic and racist harm inflicted on communities of color by scientists in the healthcare system. And this history is really important to acknowledge. One of the most infamous examples is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which sought to study untreated syphilis by deceiving 600 men enrolled in this study, promised them free health care, which they never were provided with. They never told them about their syphilis diagnoses and withheld treatment for illness. That led to the illness and death of the death of 128 participants from the illness directly, and also complications, and also led to infection in people in their social networks, so 40 wives and 19 children. So that's one of the most infamous examples of unethical treatment at the hands of scientists in the medical system that we hear about. Another example of the ways that scientists in the past have harmed communities and how some of this is bubbling up now in vaccine hesitancy are the forced sterilization campaigns in the 1960s by the US government in Puerto Rico. And so that resulted in a third of women ages 20 to 49 in 1965, they were sterilized and they were not informed that that procedure was permanent and they were not provided with contraception options. So we do have a dark history that we do need to acknowledge, but also we also have to acknowledge that people are worried now, not only due to past harms, but current bias and discrimination in the healthcare system. And so some examples of this more recently are just the ongoing negative interactions that people of color face when they are interfacing with healthcare providers, in which they feel unheard and dismissed by medical staff. And a recent example of this that had been in the news at the end of last year was the case of Dr. Susan Moore. And Dr. Moore was a physician in Indiana, hospitalized for COVID-19, who spoke out against the inferior medical treatment she felt she was receiving, and staff ignoring her complaints of pain, and she later died. So this is, again, an ongoing history that I feel that is important to acknowledge. But that said, I think the first step is confronting that history and then making amends and taking action to reduce these kind of harms. So on the second point, people are rightly cautious about taking an mRNA-based vaccine in the sense that they're trying to understand what this technology is and do their due diligence in doing the research that they need to inform themselves and their families and making their decision about taking it. And so while it's a new type of vaccine, and we received a lot of wonderful information in the previous presentation, I also want to emphasize that it's backed by decades of research. And so it may seem to many lay people, including myself, that this has been a really fast moving process, and it has, because everybody, all of the scientists in the world have been working on trying to help us come up with a tool to fight this pandemic, but that there are clinical trials, obviously, that were conducted and are sound. And so I just want to emphasize that while it seems like a fast process, and it has been, that decades of research have gone into this. But more to the area that I am probably a little bit more well-versed in, thinking about what scientists and really what public health officials and workers in public health can do to gain community trust, I want to emphasize a couple points. I think public messaging by scientists and people who work in public health continues to be really important. And I want to point to, I think, a wonderful exemplar of this kind of messaging in the example of Nurse Sandra Lindsay in New York City. So I'm from New York City. I spend a good amount of time there for caregiving. And I was actually there in December when this nurse, who is a Black woman who's been working in healthcare a long time, she was the first person in New York City to take the vaccine and among the first in the country. And again, she provided such a brave and inspiring example and emphasized her trust in the vaccine, its wide availability in the sense that it's not just being given to certain specific groups, that it's being given to the public at large as it's rolled out, to certain groups that we discussed, like healthcare workers, older adults, et cetera. And she also emphasized the devastation from the pandemic generally, but also specifically to communities of color. So I really appreciated that example and all of the examples, even from healthcare workers who have received their shots and have gone to Twitter to show us all that they're just fine after receiving them. The other thing I think that is really important, and it's not necessarily a messaging issue, but obviously I think getting the vaccine to more people is going to increase confidence over time. And so fixing these bottlenecks in the rollout is crucial. Data show that Black and Latino populations are much less likely right now to know somebody who is vaccinated. And this reflects some of the hesitancy, but also the less, that they have less access right now. And so I'm excited at efforts such as the new mass vaccination site being set up at the Oakland Coliseum, for example. And I really hope that those kind of sites increase access to the underserved communities in that area. And so I wanted to emphasize another key conduit of information, which is going to be an ongoing need. So pro-vaccine messages from public figures and trusted community institutions remain important, but I think also crucial to keep in mind one-on-one conversations with healthcare providers who respond to questions and concerns. So ranging from, maybe questions about fertility concerns to rumors of vaccines carrying microchips. And taking all of those concerns seriously, demonstrating empathy, demonstrating patience, taking time to have these conversations is crucial if we hope to vaccinate enough people to reach that herd immunity that may one day end this pandemic. And so I think educating, sharing data is also crucial, not just sort of dismissively saying, take my word for it. And these kind of webinars, the one that you're viewing and we're participating in right now, are also an important part of this public education. And so finally, I think that with all of these efforts, the message that I would communicate, and I think many in healthcare would also communicate, is that for most people, the risk of COVID's potential for severe disease, long-term damage, and death outweighs the smaller potential for vaccine side effects. And the presentation before got into a few of them, but such as a treatable allergic reaction, Bell's palsy, or even for me as somebody who has an autoimmune condition, and I've had to think about this too, even having a flare of my autoimmune condition is preferable to developing perhaps like a new mysterious disease in the form of like a long haul COVID. That's something that I've thought about a lot. So I'm going to conclude there to give everybody ample time, and I look forward to hearing more on the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Torres, for your wonderful presentation. We are going to move forward with the next two presentations, and then we will take all questions for these speakers in the same Q&A. Thank you. And our next speaker, we're so excited to be welcoming Dr. Melanie Moses, who is actually from the University of New Mexico, where she is a professor in the Department of Computer Science and the Department of Biology. Welcome, Dr. Moses.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen here so that, let's see if I can get that going. So I can share just a couple of images. And great, are you able to see the screen there? Looks good? Okay, great. So I am a computational biology professor, which is a job description some people might not think very much about or know what that means. And essentially in this case means that I build models of COVID-19 and how it spreads through the lung. And then I study, we use that model basically as like a virtual laboratory where scientists can understand how the virus works and how immune responses work. And so my job is to really to integrate a whole lot of different information out there that's produced by virologists and immunologists and medical doctors and build this into the model. And I have to say that what I've learned about COVID-19 is kind of scary. It can be a very scary disease. A lot of people have suffered. And of course, we all know about a lot of COVID-19 deaths. The other half of my work, I actually work in artificial intelligence and do a lot of work advocating for algorithmic justice. And that's the idea that as we build computer systems that are making decisions from everything from who gets a car loan to who gets sentenced to prison and who gets set free, we often see a lot of largely unintended consequences that algorithms can kind of bake in the bias that exists in systems that are already unfair. And so I kind of bring to this work the perspective of wanting to both, address the harms of COVID-19, to think about kind of the systemic ways that we're doing the vaccine rollout and how it could be better. And then from a personal level, I've spent most of the last year living near my parents and my sister who has Down syndrome. I realized as I was reading for my model building, I read an article, it was almost exactly a year ago, about who is at risk in China. And, I did the calculations, and I counted up the number of people in my family with diabetes and high blood pressure and kidney disease, and all of these things, and many people who have multiple ones of these comorbidities. And I realized if COVID-19, infected the household of my family, at least some of them would likely die. I was really quite worried. I am happy to say that as of yesterday, my mom, my dad, and my sister have all gotten their first shot. And I literally cried with relief when that happened. It was quite a struggle to get my sister her vaccine. The rollout was not as smooth as we would have liked. And so that was such an amazing relief. I'm really fortunate. I'm a professor. That means I get to do lectures from home. I can be very isolated and feel very safe. I will for sure get this vaccine the first chance I get. I will make sure my son gets this vaccine the first chance he gets. Everyone I love, I tell them the reasons that I think this vaccine is really an extremely important thing to look at carefully and to get as fast as possible. I'll say that I started off without so much enthusiasm about this vaccine. As I was reading about this mRNA technology, I was also a little skeptical. It took me a long time to learn what the decades of preparation were that made this possible. It seemed like maybe it wasn't so smart to start with everyone on the globe using this new technology. I'm like many Black people, I am sometimes pretty skeptical of the medical system. My mother grew up as a Black woman in Baltimore, really suspicious of the healthcare, even at very preeminent medical hospitals. And I don't necessarily trust that big drug companies are going to have my best interests at heart. So when I read the literature about this mRNA vaccine, I remember I called up a friend of mine who's an immunologist, and I said, "Are you aware this data looks fake? It looks too good to be true." I actually thought that it was impossible that these vaccines could be this good. And I spent weeks reading through the literature to realize, no, there's a long history where they've gotten to this point. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett is one of the chief scientists, an African-American scientist, done brilliant work on these vaccines. And she says over and over, it's not that this was fast, it's that we were prepared. We knew this could happen, and we've built up the research infrastructure to make this possible. So they did not fake the data. The data are real. I was wrong. These vaccines are really that good. And so we had an earlier talk about how good these vaccines are. And this is something that happened this week. We crossed the threshold of 100 million people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and over 2 million of those people have died. Globally, we have now had 100 million people who have received COVID-19 vaccines, and thus far, none of them have died. Now, it could be, as this rolls out, it's not that there will absolutely maintain 0 deaths, but just think about as you think about that seesaw, the balance of risk. The risk from COVID disease is so much higher than any risk that people are facing from vaccines. So this was talked about earlier, and I have friends and family with allergies and autoimmune diseases, and certainly that's worth discussing with doctors. But again, these things are the side effects are very, very rare. So that picture there is my father. He's 80 years old. He has severe dementia. I was worried. He's very, very frail. I was worried about taking him to get his vaccine. One of the consequences of the dementia is he doesn't remember that he got his vaccine, but he had no trouble with it. I think one important thing is that I think that 2 important things that we need to do with these vaccines. We've got to make them fast, get them out there fast, and we need to get them out there in a fair way. So fast means I think of this as we're in a race against the variants. We need to, as the spread is going to likely get worse in the coming weeks and months, we need to get many people vaccinated as possible. And the most vulnerable people, I think it's really important to vaccinate first. And that doesn't just mean elderly people. That really also means particularly vulnerable Black and Brown communities that are not getting vaccinated enough right now. I have this fear that by spring, we will have vaccinated a lot of older people. Once that happens, the death rate will go down, and that will be really wonderful. But I think it means we might lose the will to keep fighting this disease. And the next most vulnerable group are going to be middle-aged Black and Brown people who really are still facing a lot of risk from this disease. And so the important thing that I think we have to do is roll this out as fast as possible in these vulnerable communities. This map down here, I won't go into the details, But essentially what it's showing, this is in Washington, D.C. There have been a lot of maps produced of other cities. I don't know what San Francisco looks like. The most vulnerable places in DC, the ward that are the poorest with the blackest population has more than 3 times the COVID death risk and a third the vaccination uptake so far. And so we really have to fix that. And so I'll end with this slide. This video down there in the corner is a video of a race that happened a couple of weeks ago. This woman, she was passed the baton. She is so far behind, you'll see it in the video, so far behind these other 2 people. And she ran and she ran. What she said was, why would I try so hard to get this far and not try to win? So you can watch her lap these other racers. That's, I think, what we need to have as our mentality as we think about this disease. We're in a race, we're a little bit behind. Vaccine supply is speeding up, but we really need the distribution of vaccines to speed up and our acceptance of these vaccines, particularly in Black and Brown and vulnerable communities. So, you know, as the talk before mine was excellent and really highlighting there are well-founded fears and distrust of the medical system. We can't let that hold us back from protecting ourselves, right? We really need to think about this. You know, I understand, I've talked to so many family members. I had this thought myself, maybe I don't want to be the first one in line. You know what? When it's your turn, you want to be the first one in line, right? This is, think about this as a vaccine that is going to save, you know, your life and lives of those in your communities. And so it's so wonderful to have all of you here getting information so you can sort of counter the disinformation that's out there. So I'll leave everyone with the message, you know, get yourself, get your friends, get your family vaccinated as fast as you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Moses, for sharing both some really important information from your work and the knowledge that you brought, but also sharing a bit about your own experience. That was really wonderful. We appreciate that. Thank you. And next, our final speaker is right here from SF State. We're so excited to be joined by Dr. Pleuni Pennings, who is an associate professor in our biology department. Dr. Pennings, thank you for joining us, and she will be speaking on what do we know about these new COVID variants. We're excited for that, and we will follow with a Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Erica, for that introduction. And thank you, Gabriella, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be part of this webinar. I missed the very first talk because I was in another meeting, so I hope to catch up with that talk later on the recording. So I'm an associate professor at San Francisco State University, and I study viruses. Most of the last about 12 years of my career, I've worked on HIV, so, you know, not coronaviruses, but another virus. And I've, my specific field is evolution of viruses, and I study a lot of mutations of HIV. And so now, as we're in this pandemic, you know, for the geeky scientist in me, it's really intriguing to see you know, evolution happening as we go, and like so much data is being shared and analyzed like real quick, and many scientists around the world are like contributing and sharing their knowledge, and in a way it's amazing what we can do and see nowadays and how much we can sequence. At the same time, of course, as a human, I am you know, deeply worried about this pandemic and about what it's doing to many of us, especially communities of color and poor communities all over the world. And I'm worried about the evolution that's happening to the virus and the new variants that are coming up. So today I want to tell you a little bit about mutations and how we describe mutations in viruses or in anything. And some of that is a little bit of technical, and if you don't follow all of that, don't worry about it. And after that, I will talk a little bit about how the new variants, what they mean for the pandemic, and how we should, you know, respond to these new variants and what they mean for the vaccines, and what we can do to prevent new variants from coming up. So let me try to share my screen. Can I do that, Erica?
Yes, you should be able to share your screen. Let us know if you're having trouble.
There you go. Can you see that? Yes. Okay. So, you know, the most important part of a virus is its genetic material. It's a string of letters, nucleotides. There's about 30,000 letters in the genome of the coronavirus, and each of these 30,000 letters can change whenever it's copied. So mutations happen all the time, especially in viruses. Viruses are known to mutate fast and often. Coronaviruses are not known for being particularly fast mutating compared to other viruses. For example, HIV and hepatitis C are faster mutating viruses. So, you know, initially, many of us, who work on virus evolution, we were not particularly worried about coronavirus mutations. We knew that they were happening. We didn't think that they were going to be so important. And I've probably been quoted several times by journalists saying that we really didn't need to worry that much about new mutations. We should just try to stop the epidemic. Of course, time has proven us wrong. And now there are these new variants that are coming from different parts of the world. I'm sure you may have heard of the UK variant or the South Africa variant or the Brazil variant. These variants have carry mutations that it looks like they're making them better at infecting people. And so, you know, that is worrisome. So, you know, as science does, it surprises us sometimes. We think we know how things work, and then it turns out not to be true. So mutations happen when a virus replicates. So here, this little dot here in above, like on the top of the slide is a virus. Viruses enter cells. So when a virus infects me, it needs to get into my cells. And inside that cell, the cell is like a little factory where new viruses are made. The virus needs the cell to create new viruses. And so here you see all the viruses that were made, you know, supposedly by this cell. But what happens is that when this virus is being copied to create new viruses, it needs to copy all of these 30,000 letters. And more likely than not, one or a few of those letters are being miscopied. And so where there was maybe an A, maybe after it's all been copied at this particular position, there's no longer an A, but now there's a U. And if, if that happens, that means that at that point in my body, there may be viruses with the A and viruses with the U. If I transmit the virus to another person, it could be that the virus with the mutation is the one that's transmitted to this other person. And now this other person, all of the virus in their body now has this little change. Some of these changes, they don't really matter. They don't really change how the virus works. But sometimes these changes do matter. In general, the virus that infects someone will not be exactly the same as the virus that infects the new person. So here is a little drawing, and if you've ever taken a genetics class, you may remember that, RNA, that's a genetic material of this virus, is organized in triplets. 3 nucleotides together are translated to an amino acid. So in this case, AAU translates to asparagine. Asparagine is an amino acid, and a long string of amino acids together makes a protein. If this first A is mutated and becomes a U, you get UAU, and that translates to tyrosine, which is abbreviated as Y. So it turns out that if this happens at a specific position in the spike protein, it actually changes how the spike protein, which is, the thing that makes these spikes that you see on coronavirus pictures, it changes how that works. The spike protein is so it makes these spikes that stand off of the virus, and in the 30,000 letters of the genome of the virus, the spike protein is here. So it's somewhere towards the second half of the virus genome. And so there is a now famous mutation that is called spike N501Y. And what that means is it's a mutation that has occurred in the spike gene that makes the spike protein. It originally, the amino acid there was an N or an asparagine. And the Y stands for tyrosine, so that's the new amino acid. And 501 is for the location. So this is a change at the 501st amino acid in the string of amino acids of this protein. And it turns out that this specific mutation that changes that one little amino acid out of all of them that make up the spike, it looks like it actually changes, how the virus can infect cells and how the virus can infect people. So this spike N501Y mutation has actually been found in the Brazil, in the South African, and in the UK strains. So each of these new variants, that we, whenever a new variant is found, it doesn't have just one new mutation, but it has a few. But for some of these mutations, we know what they do, and for some of them, we don't. What is really surprising is that these 3 new variants that appear to be transmitting faster than previous variants, they all share this 501 mutation. And that is surprising. It's also a little bit comforting, because if this is the best mutation that a virus in South Africa and a virus in Brazil and a virus in England, if this is a mutation that all these 3 different strains have picked up, then maybe that means that this is the best the virus can do. And maybe this means that there's not like 100 other possible mutations that make the virus even faster spreading. We're not sure about that, but there may be a little bit of comfort in that we see repeatedly the same mutations. So what do these variants mean in practice for how we fight the pandemic? Well, the same things are still true with or without these variants. We just need to do an even better job. So we need to be careful, social distancing, stay at home if you can, although of course I realize that for many people that is not an option. Wear your masks and double mask if you can. And it also means that we need the vaccines more than ever. If you're eligible, I highly recommend that you get the vaccine. The vaccines appear to be working against these new variants, although there's some data that suggests that one of the new vaccines that has been tested in South Africa may not work as well to one of the new variants. So, and that's not impossible, that the vaccines don't work perfectly against new variants. And so, some of these vaccines may have to be updated at some point. But even if the vaccines are not perfect, these vaccines are really good, like really good. So even if they're like a little bit less good against some of these variants, that's still very good. If something reduces the probability of you getting sick or you dying, tenfold, that is still really amazing. You would still, if someone would tell you, like, if you eat avocado every day, it reduces your risk of dying from something tenfold, you would probably do that, right? And so even if the vaccines lose a little bit of their efficacy, they're still very good. So how to prevent more new variants from coming up? Well, in this case, our best defense is actually offense. So we need to try to get the virus in fewer people. And that we can do that only by vaccines and distancing. So if fewer people get infected with the virus, then the virus will get fewer mutations, because it only gets mutations when it's replicating inside our bodies, right? And so if we do not allow the virus to infect us, it cannot get mutations. And if there's fewer people worldwide that are infected, fewer new strains will come up, and it's less likely that the virus will get those specific mutations that make it, more dangerous. So we have to try to reduce the amount of virus in people. And obviously that's what we should do anyways, because it saves people's lives, but it also, is good for the future in keeping the virus from evolving too quickly. So with that, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I'm open for questions later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pennings.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate, yes, we really appreciate your insight into those new variants and understanding kind of where they're arising and what we should be thinking about regarding our protection and our safety. So thank you so much. We now are excited to open this up for a question and answer session. We have had even more questions put into the question form, so we appreciate that, and we will start there. And so we have questions both from the understanding as a community member, what you should be thinking about, concerns as community members, and then also some questions about the science. So I think to start off, there are several questions about, it was mentioned that people of color, Black and brown communities have been seen to be more vulnerable when it comes to being not only infected with the virus, but complications with the virus as far as their health. Can we have our panelists speak to a bit of what we know about those vulnerabilities and how an extension of that, how do we communicate with communities of color, which many of us come from? How do we communicate with members of those communities to encourage them to consider getting the vaccine?
I guess I could I could start with that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. And let me first just say that I really want to acknowledge the organizers, everyone who's asking these fantastic questions, and the other presenters. I've learned so much. I filled my notepad up with notes here, and really appreciate everyone's perspectives and information that they've shared. On this particular question, I think it's what we understand is there are quite a few related sort of intertwined factors that really make this disease hit in communities of color much worse than in more affluent and in white communities. And a lot of that is the kind of things that make people more vulnerable to almost any disease. So it's things like not having as good access to medical care. Professor Torres mentioned Dr. Susan Moore. This was an African-American woman doctor who had COVID and couldn't get the care she needed. She and died as a result, right? She was begging for care that she needed in the hospital and didn't get it. And so that sort of systemic racism is one of the factors. Many people think that one of the biggest factors is just exposure. So many of us work in frontline jobs. So that's everything from working in a factory, working on a farm, where, where especially if you're living with lots of other people, working in a grocery store where you're coming into contact with lots of other people, living in households that might be crowded, lots of generations living together. So younger people who are out and exposed might be living with their grandparent. And so then they're bringing that disease home to that grandparent. Whereas if that grandparent were kind of living in their own home, they would be isolated, could be isolated and sort of protected that way. Many people ask the question, oh, is it something biological? And there's very little evidence that there is anything like that. A couple of lines of reasoning that lead to the conclusion that it's much more social factors. First, it's hit Native American, African American, and Latino communities who are not very genetically related, right? So there's not sort of an argument that, oh, it's this particular community, but they face similar social and economic hardships. There's, and the issues of more exposure and less good access to healthcare and testing and treatment are sort of more than enough to explain the disparities, particularly given the prevalence of things, some of these comorbidities like diabetes or high blood pressure, which are also exacerbated by those same factors. I will put in one sort of piece of evidence. There is one factor that some people think is important, and that's vitamin D. Vitamin D is really important for your the first immune response that you mount to any virus. And people with darker skin tend to have less vitamin D in higher latitude places like North America. So a lot of people recommend, you know what, vitamin D is not going to prevent you from getting COVID. This is not something that says, don't just take vitamin D, don't get a vaccine, but it is good for your general health. it's certainly not harmful to take enough vitamin D. So, if there's one thing that you're going to do, sort of, taking a supplement and over-the-counter vitamin D is a good idea for just boosting your immune system for any disease. But the vast majority of the explanation is really about sort of living circumstances and social conditions and sort of systemic bias that we have in society.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Really appreciate your answer, both with some scientific as well as acknowledging the systemic racism as being a component as well as I know that you and Dr. Torres both spoke to the distrust of certain communities based on historical occurrences within the health field. Dr. Torres, would you like to speak to that as well a bit?
About the historic distrust? I just want to clarify.
Yes, sorry. Some of our attendees are asking about the historic distrust and calling out some of these historical reasons for why specifically communities of color feel less comfortable with seeking out the vaccine. And maybe you could speak to that, and maybe leading into a conversation if you have any suggestions as to how we might help these communities feel more comfortable, answer questions, and get the correct information to our friends and community members in these communities.
Sure. Yeah, so I heard a wonderful interview just the other day. It was another panel with two doctors, and it was like on some news station. I don't even remember where it was, but one of my hobbies these days is doing a lot of reading, too much reading about the pandemic. It's hard for me to read fiction. So I'm like, okay, well, we're living science fiction right now. And in that interview, one of the doctors mentioned that in a way it's almost too early to talk about building trust, that really there's so much kind of lingering damage that can be surmounted. I really liked Dr. Moses's points in the presentation about saying, look, we cannot afford to let this hold us back. But on the other hand, we must acknowledge it and we must find ways to remedy this situation. And unfortunately, it's a race against time at this point. And so I think, again, kind of with transparent conversations, with people being able to express their distrust and feel listened to and heard, and not just, like a stereotype of an angry person who has a grievance, who doesn't really have legitimate concerns. I think that that's really important. And that's why I emphasize these one-on-one conversations with providers. And those are really difficult. There are many communities who do not have good access, or have real reasons to be concerned about reaching out to medical authorities. For instance, if you are not documented and you do not have a provider that you can access, you would be very worried in that kind of a situation. That's just one in terms of reaching out. But I do feel that in the reaching out process, there is some hope. And so I think a lot about women's centrality in their communities and their families, and just all of the care work that women do. And so I feel, and also the danger for the medical establishment also to dismiss women. And so I think making sure that those lines of communication are open, that women's concerns are taken seriously is really important, because if you reach, one woman in a family that's doing all of this caretaking in an extended family, is in touch with her church community, is in touch with the parents of her children's friends, I really have some very cautious optimism that those kind of discussions can reach the wider community and assuage some of these harms that have been inflicted in terms of, making people feel more confident in taking the vaccine, and also combating the misinformation that's going around, and is really powerful. And even when I see some of these videos and then I see they're fact checked, I could see how people could be afraid of hearing all of these different rumors, et cetera. So that's kind of the first, I guess I'm kind of, my first impulse is always focusing on what we can do on the ground. And that's why I emphasize presentations like these webinars are so important, because right now everybody has not only learned something for themselves, but how many people will they be able to reach in the future is exponential. So.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's extremely important to recognize those in the community who can continue to collect and disseminate the correct information and information to others in their household and their neighborhoods. I just also, as a faculty member here at SF State, want to acknowledge that I think our students are a representative community also. For our students in biology, many of them are coming to us and saying, you know, my family is asking me to explain a lot of what's going on, what is real and what should I believe, and should I get this vaccine? And so we're so happy to have all of you here today. I want to acknowledge that again, because we know a lot of students are in our audience and will watch this webinar afterwards. So thank you again for all of that. So we hope that we can empower our community to go out and disseminate that information that you're providing today. Great. We also have some awesome science questions kind of leading back to what Dr. Pennings was discussing. And so Gabriella, can you help me choose a couple of these questions?
Sure.
We have a lot. This is wonderful.
Thank you. So one of the questions I've seen is, how do we know the spike protein won't change and affect the efficacy of the current vaccines?
Thank you, Gabriella. You know, I think we don't know that yet, but there is some data. So there was one vaccine that was tested where there were trials both in South Africa and in the UK, but in a part of the UK where, you know, the new strain was not yet very common, and they found that the vaccine efficacy was higher in the UK than in South Africa. And so that suggests, and in South Africa, that new strain is very common. And so that comparison suggests that maybe it's the genetics of the virus that could make the vaccine less effective in South Africa. But of course, in principle, it could also be another difference between those two countries. So it's not entirely sure. And for, say, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, I haven't seen any data yet on the difference between these like different virus strains. But, you know, it wouldn't be surprising if there's some difference, because these vaccines, they target, you know, they make your body recognize a small part of the viral genome, or a small part of a viral protein. And so if that part of the virus changes, then the vaccine, the immune response may not be as good. Still, the immune response currently is so good that even if it would be a little bit less, we think that the vaccines are still going to be extremely useful.
Thank you so much. May I ask the next question?
Yes, of course.
There is an interesting question. So it says, an avocado is a natural byproduct of nature. The vaccine is not. I'm worried 10 years from now that there will be side effects that may affect my family. Like, what do you have any advice or suggestions for this?
Yeah, I understand that question, because of course a vaccine is like something that we created, and you know, how can we know that it's safe? And so one thing I think to realize is that, you know, things that we create versus things that are natural, in both cases, it can be dangerous or it can be safe, right? The coronavirus is something that is natural in a way, like we didn't create it. And like other viruses, like, you know, the HIV, which I worked on a lot, is not something that people created, but it's very dangerous and you don't want to get that virus. Just something being natural doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. And vaccines, more than almost anything else in this world, are being tested very extensively. And so before it's FDA approved, many tests have been done, first in the lab, and then at some point on healthy volunteers, and then on people from the community. And so by the time it's FDA approved, we don't know 100% sure that the vaccine is safe forever and for everyone, but I think we know a lot more about the vaccine safety than we know about many other things. And definitely, I think Dr. Moses had these numbers where it said that like 2 million people have died of COVID, whereas 0 people have died of the vaccine, even though similar numbers have been infected with COVID versus have gotten their first vaccine shot. So nothing is certain in life, but all data that we have points towards suggesting that this vaccine is very safe and much, much better than getting the disease. Does that answer your question, you think, Gabriela? Or the question of that was posed?
Thank you for providing us your insights. I would also like to ask Dr. Moses or Dr. Torres if they have anything they would like to add. Thank you, Dr. Pennings.
Thank you. I could add one thing that I actually, I had this concern too, right? This is, and the concern is that there could be long-term effects that we don't understand. And one thing to understand about the vaccine rollout is that we were able to test the vaccine's effectiveness so quickly simply because there's an ongoing pandemic. Usually when vaccines are rolled out, there are not lots of people who are exposed to the virus to test it with. So we could accumulate that data really fast. And so it feels very scientifically sound that we have that certainty. But for very long term, we couldn't possibly have this for any vaccine for a disease that hasn't existed for more than a year. I found it very comforting to hear a number of experts explain that if there have ever been side effects to vaccines before, they usually occur in the first 6 weeks. So there really are no documented cases of years and years later, some prevalent reaction to a vaccine happening. They happen quickly. Allergic reactions and autoimmune reactions are very rare, as they talked about before, but they do happen. But when they happen quickly. So we already sort of have enough of the data about those kinds of reactions to feel comforted that there's not, there's not some hidden piece of this that reaction to this that we don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add too, the dangers of COVID are so wide ranging, and we still don't know a lot about the long-term damage, even for people who had asymptomatic cases, who had milder cases. But every day I feel like more and more data are emerging about long COVID. And so long COVID is sort of becoming now the syndrome. It may be autoimmune like in nature, in which people who are in their 20s and 30s are developing brain fog, are having continuing problems breathing, are fatigued, like this kind of autoimmune like syndrome. And as somebody who has an autoimmune disease, I deal with a number of these symptoms on a daily basis. And this is something I was diagnosed with like 15 years ago. I was 26 years old, and I have it my whole life. And so my whole mission personally has been not to take on a new mysterious disease that we do not know what the long-term implications are in terms of the damage to the small blood vessels. There's the potential for like lifelong, maybe loss of taste and smell. I saw something the other day about how diabetes had been triggered in some people. It's like every day you're listening to new terrible news. As Dr. Pennings so eloquently discussed, what we know about the risks of the vaccine, that really we have had rigorous clinical trials to try to sort out some of those risks. And, there's nothing in life, unfortunately, you cannot protect yourself from all risk. Even walking, I've been, more and more worried these days about getting hit by a car in my neighborhood because people are driving, so erratically and recklessly. I could step out the door and I'm also incurring some risk, but I just really feel that the dangers of COVID as we know them now, and even things that we don't know, are so grave and so frightening that we really need to consider that, as opposed to a risk that right now we do not have evidence is real in terms of the vaccine and may never materialize.
Thank you so much.
Gabby, I think we had a few questions that have come up. I think we have maybe covered them a bit earlier on, but I know Dr. Pennings, you might be able to offer some more information regarding how do we choose which of these vaccines that we may get if there are multiple? Should we be worried about that? Do you have any insight or thoughts on the different vaccines out there?
That's a good question. So, I would definitely have a preference in the sense that if we know that one vaccine is estimated 95% efficacy and another vaccine is estimated 70% efficacy, I would want to have the 95% one. On the other hand, we know that vaccine doses are they're not enough, and so any vaccine is better than no vaccine. So I would take whatever I can get. And ultimately, I think the most important thing is that the more people get vaccinated, the better it is for all of us. The vaccine is going to bring us this elusive herd immunity that we've heard about a lot in the beginning, where the idea is that so many people at some point, have become vaccinated that the virus, it runs out of people to jump to. And so ultimately it's not just about protecting myself, but it's about making a community that is protected against the virus. So I would say if I were offered any vaccine, I would take it. If it's FDA approved, I would take it.
Thank you. We appreciate your information on the different vaccines and your decisions that you would make. Thank you. Gabriella?
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna combine two questions. I think they're on the same realm. So the first question is, what are some best mechanisms to get vaccine information out to communicate to communities of color? Given many internet and language issues. And the other question is, as you know, many people of color have been affected negatively historically by science. What would you say to those communities and to move forward? And yeah, anyone can answer, please. Thank you so much.
These are tough questions.
I could maybe jump in on one of these, and sorry, it seems like I can't get my, I think my video is on, but anyway, I will just speak to the sort of the legitimate distrust of the system. And I think it's important to talk about, that the medical system has sometimes been untrustworthy. And so it's really, I think Professor Torres spoke very eloquently about this. It's very understandable why people have a fear of the scientific community and the medical community not having their best interests at heart, or even actively, wanting to do them harm. I understand that fear. And I think in this case, the thing that we have to come to terms with is we can't let that fear keep us from protecting ourselves, because this vaccine really is protective. And it's why it's so important to have, the scientists who have developed vaccines and scientists from and public health professionals really explaining why this is, helping people to understand why this vaccine is so valuable, right? How it really can save your life, can save a life of a family member, or as Professor Torres said, prevent what could be a horrible, potentially even lifelong disease response to COVID-19. And so it's an act that's hard, right? In some ways, one of the benefits of privilege is being able to trust the medical system, right? Of having always gone to the doctor, and the doctor has your best interest at heart. And when that isn't your circumstance, it's much harder to have that trust. But that just perpetuates the negative consequences of systemic racism. And so in some ways we have to sort of step over this and say, you know what, not only do we need to embrace this vaccine, we need to really we need to demand it, right? We need to say we have just as much right to this life-saving technology as the people who live in the wealthy zip codes do. And it's a hard thing to do, but I think that's a piece of that. We also need to demand that our political leaders and our health departments and everyone really make this vaccine more accessible to all of us, because it's not enough necessarily to say I want this vaccine if I don't have access to the transportation necessary to get it. So really pushing for getting the vaccines given in our communities, I think this is an important next step. And I see people with great ideas about how to get information and vaccines to into the communities where they're needed.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one thing I would add too, so I could speak a little bit to the real hurdles that are being thrown up in terms of people with language, not being, born English speakers is one thing, and also internet access has been huge. And I am just, I have to calm myself down when I talk about this, because the rollout has just been catastrophic for many groups who are not able to access, the information they need about how to get appointments. My work as a sociologist has centered on older adults, so adults over the age of 65, aging in neighborhoods. And so I look a lot in my research about how people, whether older adults or in some future research, people who are struggling with mental health problems, how they connect in neighborhood spaces when there's not a pandemic going on, and how they share information and talk to each other about different things that they're encountering when they go to the doctor, or they're having trouble filling a prescription. And so I think one of the things that I'd like to emphasize, like, the situation is such that this is still a very messy and frustrating rollout. And I speak as the daughter of an immigrant, an immigrant father in New York City right now. I have not been able to arrange an appointment for him to get a vaccine. And he's 78, and he has multiple illnesses that make him very, very vulnerable to death from COVID. And it's just been infuriating. And he's not able to have the energy and have the sort of cultural capital to be able to access, the internet and these discussions. It's just all too tiring. So I have him basically on a list that is 600 people long at a local pharmacy. And when his turn comes, his turn comes. And thank goodness he's retired and can shelter in place as long as he needs to in order to get that. And so I would say, I want to emphasize the point before that was made by Dr. Sanchez about students being really critical, vessels of information for their families. And again, being able to pass on good, reliable information to people in your families who may need that kind of translation that may not be happening from kind of public officials to communities. That's huge. And just to emphasize the points that Dr. Moses made before too, about why are our communities of color suffering more. There are all of these structural conditions, and they're not an accident. They are products of decades and decades of systemic racism. And so one of the things I've been thinking about lately too in this whole rollout is, even if you're able to get to a pharmacy, there are places that are pharmacy deserts. And so you cannot even get to a pharmacy within a couple miles of your home. And I live in the 94601 zip code in Oakland. And so this is in the Fruitvale area. And we've had some of the highest rates of COVID in Alameda County in the Bay Area. And further east of me in deep East Oakland, there are really several areas that are considered pharmacy deserts. So that's just to say that there are a ton of hurdles, but there are also ways to get information out, whether it's like a one-on-one conversation, whether it's if you are able to access technology and help somebody who is not sign up for an appointment, that is something that can be done. And even just Spanish language television, for example, has been a critical source of information for my father. Just kind of getting them, people in your lives who need information connected to good sources is really key here.
Yeah, I would also like, thank you for these great answers. I thought that I would just repeat again what has been said before, and that is like, if someone doesn't trust the system or doesn't trust the vaccine or doesn't trust the doctor, like the last thing you want to do is like tell them that they're wrong, or like we have to listen why people don't trust them, because they probably have very good reasons for that distrust. And if we don't listen to people, people are not going to listen to us. And one thing that I was wondering, I don't know if anyone has shared this. Can I share my screen for a second? Like this, there's this these graphs from the vaccine trial. So this is from the Pfizer trial that I thought honestly was like really convincing, and I'm not sure if people are interested, but this is something you could possibly share with family. And so here, these two lines, this is the people who actually got the Pfizer shot, and these are the people who got the placebo. So they got like, just a shot with nothing, but they didn't know that. And this is like the number of days after getting the shot. And on the y-axis is how many people got COVID. And so you see that the people who got the vaccine, at some point, the line is flat. Nobody gets COVID anymore, or like almost, it's not nobody, but it's almost nobody. And the people who got the placebo, so who, did not get the vaccine, they continue, like new people get COVID all the time. And so, for me, this sort of really shows how good these vaccines are. And I don't know, it's maybe something, this is something definitely that, I would share with my dad and tell him like, look, you should get your vaccine.
Thank you. And I just want to add that also it's important for everyone to look for accurate information. And if you have opportunity to join webinars, and probably you are like in my family, only my siblings and I speak English and my parents speak Spanish. So I try to attend every single webinar I can about vaccine information. I also attended webinars in Spanish. I invited my family. I try to spread the word in my social media, and whatever I know, and I know I learned it from reliable sources like professors who have been involved in this research, professors who have been keeping up with literature. I spread that message to my family, and I highly encourage everyone to do the same, because as I said, and I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive, but this is like a community, and we all have to support each other and make all these resources available, because not everyone has access to these resources. And with that, I also want to remind you that we have this list of resources that we have collected. We have the different links to different papers or things that we have heard from the CDC, for example, from FDA, where they explain why this vaccine, why was able to get to the pipeline fast. And the sources we have so far are in Spanish and English, but please feel free to add any resources you want you want to be shared. And this is a working document. Everyone is welcome to share ideas and also links. So yeah, we all have to work together to make everyone get access to knowledge, pretty much, especially to the ones who don't have that access. So yeah, that's all I need to add.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, and thank you all for both answering these questions from your research, your academic background, but also from your personal experience, and adding in that sense of the importance of our ability to communicate with the people around us. Thank you so much. And thank you, Gabriela. Again, we want to acknowledge how much that we were brought here today because of the concerns and the efforts of students in our department and at SF State. So we thank you all. We thank you, SF Build, students at both SF State as well as UCSF, and obviously all of our wonderful speakers who joined us today. Thank you for both presenting and answering so many of our questions. We have about 2 minutes left together. It went by quite quickly. I agree. I learned so much from each of you, and it was wonderful seeing the activity in the chat. Thank you everyone for attending. We do have a short final survey for you. We just like to get a sense of your experience today. So please go ahead and visit this link before you leave and answer a few questions about your experience in the webinar. With that, we would like to thank you, and we'd like to leave you with access to these resources. Please join me in a round of applause and a thank you session for our invited speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.